Hey everyone, what's up? I'm Mary, and today I want to have some real talk with you about Solasta 2, a game that's been drawing a lot of attention and that I finally got to test. After playing the demo and closely following the announcements from Tactical Adventures, I confess that my expectations have changed quite a bit. That feeling of playing a hardcore tabletop RPG is still there, but the developer clearly decided to aim higher with this sequel. If you're into deep tactical RPGs, I'll say right now that this is a title that deserves your attention. The first thing that hits you right in the face when you get into the game is the visual leap. The franchise's first title was excellent in its mechanics, but we know the graphics weren't its strongest suit. Now, running on Unreal Engine 5, the look of the new continent of Neokos is simply incredible. It's really cool to see how the development team took community feedback and invested heavily in immersion, creating much more detailed environments that truly pull you into that magical world. Another new feature that completely changed my experience during the demo was the new movement system. The addition of keyboard movement controls brings a huge amount of fluidity to exploration, removing some of the limitations of the traditional point-and-click, although that option is still present for those who prefer the classic style. Walking through the maps with this new free perspective made me feel much more connected to the characters, giving it a much more dynamic and immersive adventure vibe. Speaking of combat and rules, which is where the magic really happens, the system remains absurdly faithful to the tabletop experience. They are updating the mechanics to the latest 2024 rule set, which means we'll have the highly anticipated option to multi-class, something that was sorely missed in the previous game. In the demo, the grid-based tactical battles and the use of terrain already showed that combat is still the absolute high point of the game, demanding real strategy during clashes. World exploration also promises a much larger and more ambitious scale in this new development phase. The developer announced a hexagonal world map with random narrative events and dialogue paths with actual branching. This shows a very clear shift towards a more cinematic story, focused on the relationship of your adventuring party, featuring a found family theme. I felt they want to deliver a less linear narrative that is much more reactive to our tactical choices during the campaign. An important detail is that the demo limited us to pre-made characters in a single-player-focused experience, but the promises for the final version leave me very excited. The focus on online co-op for up to 4 players and full party customization with 12 available classes are crucial elements for the longevity of the adventure. Imagining the possibilities of building varied comps and exploring this brand new universe with friends is spectacular. Solasta 2 seems to be one of those sequels that takes everything that worked, turns it up to the max, and fixes major flaws. With the early access launch set for March 12th, 2026, I believe Tactical Adventures has a fantastic project on their hands. I really want to know what you guys think of the news and which class you plan to test first, so drop your thoughts in the comments. We know the first title shone brightly in its combat, but the narrative was merely functional and served more as an excuse for the next battle. From what I've tested and seen from the developer so far, the promise is that this sequel will bring a plot that actually keeps us glued to our seats from start to finish. The first big change that caught my eye was the setting, since we've now been dropped into the brand new continent of Neokos. In the demo, you could immediately feel that this world breathes much more life and has a much denser background than the regions of the previous game. It's a continent that mixes classic high fantasy with very ancient mysteries, and exploring this environment gave me that genuine feeling of discovering uncharted territory full of secrets. The narrative focus this time seems to revolve around magic and highly dangerous anomalies known as mana nexuses, alongside a constant threat involving the Shadwin faction. Personally, I love it when an RPG explores how magic affects the world in an unstable and dangerous way. From the documents and conversations I found during the demo, you can tell we aren't just dealing with a generic, forgettable villain, but rather a magical collapse that deeply affects local society and politics. Another point the developer highlighted, which I got a small taste of in the demo, is the found family theme. In the first game, our party felt like just a bunch of mercenaries who happened to group up in a tavern. Now, the dialogues between party members are much more organic, well-written, and full of personality. You really feel like those adventurers are building genuine bonds of friendship and trust while surviving the dangers of Neokos. The way the story is told has also leveled up absurdly in this sequel. Tactical Adventures hired a heavyweight voice acting cast and invested heavily in much more cinematic dialogues. During the demo, the cutscenes and interactions really reminded me of high-budget productions in the genre, with much better facial expressions and camera angles that lend massive dramatic weight to the discoveries we make. Speaking of campaign choices, the new hexagonal world map isn't just for wandering around freely, as it introduces random narrative events that demand tough decisions from the player. This freedom to shape the journey with real branching paths is what excited me the most about the team's promises. I feel like every playthrough will deliver a unique experience, where interacting with an NPC or ignoring a map event will have real consequences on how future events unfold. The team took the main criticism of the first game and turned the story into one of the most ambitious pillars of this new adventure. Gameplay is where the game truly shows that Tactical Adventures learned the right lessons from the first game. The turn-based tactical combat remains faithful to the 5e SRD, but this time using the 2024 D&D rule set, which in practice means that classes that previously seemed irrelevant in certain situations now have their own identity and feel useful from start to finish. Just this detail changes the experience quite a bit, because you start the game feeling like every character has a real role in the party. The weapon mastery system is honestly one of the additions that hyped me up the most in the demo. Martial classes now have genuine tactical options in combat. They aren't just waiting for their turn to hit the enemy while the wizards do all the magic. A fighter with a mace can impose disadvantage on the enemy's next attack, while another mastery can push or knock down targets. This creates a tactical depth that the first Solasta never had for physical classes, and it was something I always felt was missing from that game. Character creation is clearly improved. You have a quick creation option for those who just want to play, and advanced creation with all the tabs for class, ancestry, background, skills, and spells for those who want to dive deep into the numbers. Multi-classing is already confirmed, and the demo even comes with a pre-made character who is a fighter and life cleric multi-class, showing that Tactical Adventures isn't hiding this for a future expansion. This is the kind of commitment to build depth that the CRPG community truly values. What really impressed me in the demo was the transparency of the combat system. When you have advantage on a roll, the game shows you exactly the success percentage and the reason why you have that advantage. This seems small, but it makes a huge difference in quality of life because you're never left wondering what's influencing your chances. Baldur's Gate 3 does something similar, but the impression I got is that Solasta 2 expands on it a bit, making everything even more readable for those who really want to understand the numbers. The noise detection mechanic and stealth is another point that positively surprised me. During the demo, when you're sneaking, there's a visual noise ring around your character showing the range of the sound they're making. It seems like a small design detail, but it's exactly the kind of feature that separates a CRPG that thought about user experience from one that just threw a mechanic into the game and hoped for the best. The use of light in environments also remains a relevant tactical factor, which maintains that DNA of careful exploration that was one of the things the first Solasta did well. That being said, the demo also made some problems clear that need attention. The absence of the ready action in combat is a huge oversight for a game that wants to be faithful to D&D 5e, because preparing an action is fundamental in real tactical strategies. Additionally, there is no way to hide during combat, which limits stealth-focused builds in a very frustrating way. The demo's final battle was also confusing in terms of objectives. I spent a good amount of time not knowing if I was supposed to defend something, escape, or simply eliminate all the enemies. Objective clarity in combat is basic, and this needs to be fixed before the full launch. Overall, Solasta 2's gameplay is heading in the right direction in a way that makes me want to play more, not just out of curiosity, but because the combat loop feels good. Comparing it to Baldur's Gate 3 is inevitable, but I think it's the wrong comparison to make, because Solasta 2 isn't trying to be that game. It's trying to be the best Solasta possible, with more tactical depth and fewer accessibility concessions. For those who enjoy the rigidity of the system and want to feel the satisfaction of building a well-balanced party and making everything work in combat like clockwork, Solasta 2 has real potential to be a very satisfying experience. Anyone who played the first Solasta knows the graphics were, to put it kindly, functional. They worked for what the game needed, but the character models had that unsettling quality of almost looking human, but not quite getting there. The famous uncanny valley that made close-up dialogues mildly uncomfortable to watch. So when Tactical Adventures announced they were moving from Unity to Unreal Engine 5, my reaction was mixed because switching engines from scratch is a huge risk for a small studio, and the fear was that the game would lose its identity in the process. Fortunately, that fear didn't come true. The visual leap between Crown of the Magister and Solasta 2 is, without exaggeration, impressive. Character models have been completely remade with a new philosophy that art director Thierry Dunter explained well. Realism with a slight exaggeration of features to tell a visual story. The paladin looks noble, the veteran warrior carries scars on his face, and each character communicates their essence before they even open their mouth. This is the kind of design you appreciate more the longer you look at it, and it's exactly what a tactical RPG needs, because you'll be looking at these models for dozens of hours. The environments in the demo also show that the art team is making good use of Unreal Engine 5's capabilities. Dynamic lighting inside the dungeons creates real atmosphere. It isn't just aesthetic, it affects combat and reinforces the tension of exploring an unknown space. Tor Wen, the starting village, has that feeling of a place that exists even when you aren't there, with architectural and vegetation details that help build a sense of world. It isn't the detail level of a AAA game with a massive budget, but for a studio the size of Tactical Adventures, the visual delivery is beyond expectations. The 3D world map is a change that deserves special mention because it seems small but makes a huge difference in immersion. In the first game, it was a static 2D illustration you clicked through to travel, which worked but felt lazy. Now, the map is three-dimensional. You travel across hexagonal tiles, find hidden locations, and experience random events along the way. This transforms the act of traveling between locations from a mere screen transition into part of the game experience. And it's the kind of detail that shows Tactical Adventures is thinking about the project's visual cohesion as a whole. Character customization has also evolved a lot graphically. Now you have tattoos with adjustable placement on the face and body, different face paint options, and a level of facial detail that lets your party truly feel like your own. Character creation has gotten much closer to what modern games offer, and it was clear in the demo that the company invested real time into it, not just updating textures over the old system. This matters especially because in close-ups, during dialogues, these faces are constantly highlighted. Now, being honest about the technical issues, the demo has two visual flaws that must be mentioned. The first is the ghosting and smearing during movement, that subtle blur that appears when the camera or characters move, likely caused by temporal anti-aliasing or DLSS, which seems to be active even when you try to turn it off. The second is performance on more modest hardware, which still leaves a lot to be desired. This is partially excusable because it's a demo running on an engine that is relatively new to the studio, but these are issues the PC community won't tolerate for long and need to be seriously addressed before the full launch. Solasta 2 visually positions itself in a place I didn't expect Tactical Adventures to reach. It's not at the level of Baldur's Gate 3, and probably never will be because the budget difference is massive, but it's clearly above average for indie CRPGs and genuinely surprises anyone coming from the first game with low expectations. What impressed me the most wasn't a specific scene or a particular effect. It was the visual consistency across menus, environments, characters, and the map. Everything feels like it belongs in the same universe. And for a studio that practically started from scratch in a new engine, that visual cohesion is the highest praise I can give. I know this is a sensitive topic, especially for those expecting a more polished experience in terms of optimization. So let me be very direct here about what I saw and felt while playing. The most obvious point that everyone notices in the first hour of the demo is that the switch to Unreal Engine 5 came with a considerable technical price tag. On high settings, with a graphics card that should handle it without issues, the game dropped below 60 frames per second in certain areas, especially in the caves, where the visuals reached their most impressive peak. This kind of drop isn't exactly unexpected for a title in the demo phase, but it raises an important red flag, as Tactical Adventures is a relatively small studio, and polishing UE5's performance is a massive challenge. The situation with blurring and ghosting during movement was what personally bothered me the most throughout the entire session. It feels like temporal anti-aliasing or DLSS was being forced all the time, leaving the image weirdly smoothed out even when the render scale was at 100%. For a tactical game where you need to clearly read the battlefield, enemies, and characters, this visual fog is a real problem, not just an aesthetic one. Looking at the Steam forums after playing, I realized I wasn't alone in this. Users with cards like the RTX 4060 were reporting only 45 to 50 frames even on the lowest settings, and a very active thread complained about heavy drops even with an RX 7900 XTX at 1440p. The GPU power consumption also seemed disproportionately high for the visual level delivered, suggesting that the engine's optimization is allowing a lot of resources to be wasted during rendering. But here I have to be fair to Tactical Adventures because the team itself publicly acknowledged the problem right after the demo dropped. They explained that above 1080p, the game struggles quite a bit in this pre-alpha phase and promised that the engineers would work hard on optimization before the early access launch. In fact, a team member confirmed on the forums that significant performance improvements were implemented in the period between the demo and the early access build, which at least shows they are taking the situation seriously. On the Steam Deck, the situation around the time of the demo was quite rough, running at 15 FPS on low settings and 800p resolution, making the experience practically unplayable in handheld mode. This is an important detail for anyone intending to enjoy the game on Valve's handheld, at least in the early stages. With early access arriving on March 12th, it will be crucial to monitor how the community reports on this across different hardware configs. Ultimately, my stance on Solasta 2's performance is simple. The situation in the demo was problematic, but not damning, considering it was clearly an unfinished build. Unreal Engine 5 is powerful and beautiful, but it requires a level of optimization that smaller studios need time to master. I'm still keeping an eye on it and feel confident the team will resolve a good chunk of this on the road from early access to full launch, but performance is definitely something you need to track before buying. Let's talk about what you are actually buying at the early access launch, because that changes everything in the analysis. The initial release will deliver over 10 hours of gameplay, 6 playable classes like Wizard, Fighter, Paladin, Rogue, Cleric, and Sorcerer, 4 ancestries, and a level cap fixed at 4. This is a slice of just a part of Act 1, which means you're paying to play a game that is clearly incomplete and still under active construction by the team. Speaking of price, Tactical Adventures confirmed that early access will be cheaper than the final release, and the community expects something around $40, going up to something close to $60 at full launch. There's also a completely optional $10 supporter pack with cosmetics that don't affect gameplay at all, and the developer was transparent in saying it's just a tip for their small team. I really respect that because smaller studios need this support to finish the game with quality. Now, the million-dollar question. Is it worth buying on the 12th? or waiting for the full launch. For me, it depends entirely on the type of player you are. If you want the complete experience with working online co-op, the faction system, crafting system, more classes, more ancestries, and the fully developed world map, then the answer is to wait without a shadow of a doubt. All of that will arrive throughout the early access updates, but it won't be there on day one. On the other hand, if you're a tactical RPG fan, enjoyed the demo, love D&D 5e, and want to actively participate in the development process by giving feedback, early access makes a lot of sense and is also cheaper. Tactical Adventures has a very positive track record of transparency and listening to the community from their first game. Buying now also ensures you pay less, while helping the game reach its final launch in a more polished state for everyone. Who would I recommend Solasta to without hesitation? To fans of turn-based tactical RPGs who love the D&D 5e system and want an authentic, digitized tabletop experience, this game was made for you. If you enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3 but wanted an even stronger focus on grid-based tactical combat, if you loved the first Solasta, or if you simply want a fully fleshed-out party adventure, this is a title that will hook you. I wouldn't recommend it to those who prefer real-time action or more cinematic, linear narratives, because the pacing here is completely different. Will I buy Solasta 2 at the early access launch? The honest answer is yes, and without much hesitation. After everything I saw in the demo, the details the team shared, and the obvious care Tactical Adventures has for this universe, I want to be part of this adventure from the very beginning. The initial 10 hours of content are enough for me to make the investment worthwhile, and knowing that more content will arrive while the price is still discounted is more than enough reason to buy it on launch week.